Secular campuses are being transformed, but the students need your help. Last year, students at 41 secular universities asked to start TI chapters. Only 10 could be funded. The rest are still waiting. Please, give a student the yes they've been praying for. They're ready, but they can't share the truth without you. Your gift before September 15th can launch a new TI chapter and change lives. Go to Thomisticinstitute.org/donate or use the link in this episode to give today.
Welcome to the Thomistic Institute podcast. Our mission is to promote the Catholic intellectual tradition in the university, the church, and the wider public square. The lectures on this podcast are organized by university students at Thomistic Institute chapters around the world. To learn more and to attend these events, visit us at Thomisticinstitute.org.
Winston Churchill observed, "We build our buildings, and our buildings build us." This is certainly true of Trinity College Dublin's beautiful buildings. Great expense was undertaken to create these majestic, stately buildings that now build you. Build in you a sense of your own dignity, your illustrious heritage, and the greatness to which every human person is called. But isn't this also true of our interior architecture? What are the buildings within that we have built with our imaginations, our memories, our chosen input? What we read, the conversations we've had, the things we've watched and listened to, or perhaps even those scrolls of doom. What are the libraries, the living rooms, the bars, the shopping plazas, the prisons, the concentration camps, and the cathedrals that we've built in our own imaginations? They tell us something of who we are. So our conversation tonight, in part, is to treat of the project of literature. What is the project of literature in Western civilization? But I want you to think in broader terms of what has, in a sense, become the literature of today. What do we read? Twitter. We read, what are those, the messages that you receive when you text people, right? There's all kinds of things that we could, in a sense, consider our literature. The movies, the music, television series, poetry, plays, things, unfortunately, that we find on TikTok or Instagram, Snapchat, right? Some of this has all become part of the literature of today. And is that literature, is it a mere artifact of culture? Or is it rather a driving force that shapes culture? Look at this word, culture. It comes from the root, Latin, cultus, cult. Not in the sense of creepy cult, right? Let's all drink poisoned Kool-Aid, hopefully survive. No, not that kind of creepy cult. But cultus, in the sense of what we worship, what we reverence, what we value, what we hold dear. So it's from this word cultus that we get the word culture, but it's also where we get the word cultivate. Because isn't that what culture seeks to do? It seeks to cultivate something in our minds and in our hearts. And what is the something that is being cultivated? Is it weeds, spiny, thorny things? Envy, jealousy, bitterness, resentment. And what does that give to other people? Sadness, sorrow, hatred. Or is what we seek to cultivate within flowers, something that will bloom and blossom and give joy to others, patience, generosity, mercy, forgiveness, laughter. So this question of what we tend, what we sow and reap in the field of our own hearts is incredibly important. Not only for yourselves, but also for your children. Because you, if your vocation is marriage, you will also be shaping the minds and hearts of your children. And so, all truly great literature seeks to answer one question. And what is that one question? What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be human? And the best of literature answers for us the perennial questions that Plato posed. He poses the same question, but more specifically. What does it mean to be noble, to be just, to be honorable, to be good? If you look at Aristotle in his rhetoric and his poetics, in the work of Cicero, the rhetorician, they speak of the rhetorician as having three aims. But I would like us to apply those three aims of the rhetorician to great literature, because great literature has the same three aims. And what are they? First, to instruct. Right? This is considered logos. What is the reason, the philosophy, the argument behind the work of literature? It's logos, to instruct. Second, to delight. The ethos. What's the spirit, the character, the ethics that carries us along in the piece of literature? And then finally, to move or to inspire. Pathos. Moving the heart. Drawing it to be attracted to the good and to be repulsed by what is evil. Okay, if you have a better example from contemporary culture, please share it with me. But the example of being attracted to the good, the one that comes immediately to mind is from Marvel Comics. Marvel movies now, Captain America. Do you remember this? You have that little skinny guy, Steve Rogers, right? But there's the professor who's choosing Steve Rogers, the little skinny guy, to be injected with this special serum that's going to make him Captain America. But the sergeant has great objections because he's this asthmatic skinny guy, right? And so do you remember this? They're out there on the field and they're doing their jumping jacks, right? And the sergeant decides that he's going to take a grenade, pulls a pin out, and he throws a grenade and he says, "Live grenade!" Right? And they're doing their jumping jacks. The big strong guys run off the field immediately and take cover. What does this little skinny Steve Rogers do? He curls up around the grenade and says, "Everybody, get back! Get back! Get back!" Do you remember this? And then there's this great silence. But it was not a live grenade. But what do we see at that moment? The heroism of this young man who was willing to die so that others would not be harmed. Can you imagine a young boy watching this? What does it inspire in his heart? What does it move him to? This ideal of heroism. So notice this is the pathos, right? That powerful element. This attraction to the good. Or you also find in great literature repulsion to evil. Now it's very unfortunate. Disney movies are often an impoverished version of older legends, or for instance, the fairy tales of Hans Christian Andersen. So the original Little Mermaid. Oh, I can't encourage you enough to read the original Little Mermaid in Hans Christian Andersen. The Jean Herholtz translation into English is absolutely fabulous. So Disney, unfortunately, in the actual version, she does not get the prince. And you know what her punishment is? So it's true, she has 1 year to get the prince to fall in love with her. And this is actually true. This wasn't the Disney version, but it's in the Hans Christian Andersen version. But when she's on her way to go see the sea witch, what does she see along the way? She sees dead mermaids along her way to go see the sea witch. Because the sea witch actually is a representative, symbolizes the devil. And what does the sea witch do? The sea witch gives her a potion that she drinks, right? She has to trade her most prized possession, which is her beautiful voice. She trades that for this potion. And when she drinks this potion, it will turn her fin into legs, right? This is what Disney leaves out, that when she drinks the potion, it feels like a knife going down her fin. And then it turns into, her fin turns into legs. And every step she takes, she feels like she's walking on knives. Okay, that's what it's really, that's what's in the original version of the fairy tale. Why? Because she's trying to be something she's not. All because she fell in love with this human world, and she falls in love with this prince that she actually rescued. And then, you know what the punishment that she's supposed to receive if she doesn't get the prince to fall in love with her in 1 year? Is that she's supposed to turn into sea foam. That's what's supposed to happen to her. And in the original tale, she does not get the prince to fall in love with her. And so she's sitting there, waiting, watching the sunrise, waiting for the sun to rise, because at that moment, she's going to turn into sea foam. But this is the amazing thing. As she's watching the sunrise, what does she see? She sees her sisters. I think she even has 4 or 5 sisters. They're also mermaids, because she belongs to this beautiful royal family underneath the sea. And they're bobbing up and down in the water. And all of their hair has been shorn, because they sold all of their hair to the sea witch. For what? To buy a knife. A knife, a dagger, that if she puts it through the heart of the prince and takes his blood and puts it on her legs will turn back into a fin. So her sisters say, look, we have this dagger for you. You can come, return to us in the sea. And so she reaches out, she takes the dagger, right? And she goes to the chamber of the prince where he's sleeping with his bride, right? It's their wedding night. And they're already asleep. And so she has the candle, and she's holding the candle, and she has the dagger in the other hand. But as she looks at the prince, she has a real love for him. Right? Her love began as a selfish, vain love. But by the end of this year, and he's fallen in love with this other girl. He's already married her. He rejected her. He loved her as more of a friend, but she has no voice. She could never express her love. But she has come at this moment to reveal the love of the prince. And so she cannot kill the prince. Right? She just sheds tears and walks back to the water. She takes the dagger, she throws it across the water, and everywhere the dagger touches, the water turns into blood. And then it sinks. And now what happens at sunrise? She's supposed to turn into sea foam. But she doesn't. What happens? Instead, these spirits of the air come and they say, because of the mercy you have shown, you can become one of us. And you can spend your life now inspiring little children to do good. And every time they do good, your time as a spirit of the air lessens. And then eventually she's going to end up in something like that's the equivalent of heaven. But what do you have in the original story? In the original story, you have something much richer, right? A repulsion for evil. But also even this sense that there is this omnipotent power that directs the universe. And that omnipotent power is characterized by mercy and love. Right? So it has simultaneously the repulsion for evil and the attraction for the good. Right? This is great literature. Okay. So logos, to instruct, ethos, to delight, pathos, to move and to inspire. Each of these three are employed to what end in great literature? The shaping of the moral imagination. The shaping of the moral imagination. Why? Return to that Thomistic principle that before we can carry out any action in reality, we must first conceive of it in our imagination. Right? Have you ever thrown anybody a surprise birthday party? What do you have to do? You have to imagine it first, right? Like, okay, when can we surprise them? Well, what's the surprise going to be? And how is it going to happen, right? You have to choose the time, the place, the action, the surprise. You have to go through everything. Oh, we can't do it that time because that's when other thing is happening. Okay, so to carry out any action, you have to first conceive of it in your imagination. Same thing for the wicked person, right? They want to steal a car. They have to first conceive in their imagination how they're going to do this. So, if our question is, what does it mean to be truly human? How is it that I can be noble, just, honorable, or pure? Well, first I have to have presented to my imagination characters who in their own worlds and in their own situations and circumstances show me what it means to be noble, to be just, to be honorable, to be good, to be pure. And isn't this one of the beautiful aspects of literature? That through literature, we simultaneously inhabit 1,000 worlds from which we draw to build our moral imagination. Now, one of my favorite pieces of children's literature is from the States. Can you raise your hand if you have ever heard of Laura Ingalls Wilder, Little House on the Prairie? Okay. Well, I can't encourage you enough to look into these books, especially if you're thinking of having children. These are wonderful books to shape the moral imagination of children. So it's also been studied historically as a development of what happened in the pioneer days of America. So this Little House on the Prairie, what is it? It's a family. It's a home built on self-sacrifice. So who are the basic characters? This is real, right? It's autobiographical. Laura Ingalls Wilder is telling her own story. Okay, so there's Pa, his name is Charles, Ma, her name is Caroline, and then they have 3 daughters. Mary, Laura, who's writing this, she's the middle child, and then the youngest girl, Carrie. And what you see in Pa is something quite remarkable, right? He's the only man, and so he's doing all the work. And then his wife and the girls, they can help with the household chores. But pretty much Pa is earning the living of the whole family, supporting the whole family. He's doing all the farming work, okay? So he's doing all this work. And then they go into town, and then they buy groceries, they buy material to make clothing, they buy shoes for the girls, etc., etc. So one of these times that they're spending the money that Pa has earned to buy the things that they need for the next few months, there's $3 left. And so all the girls, Ma and the 2 girls, the 2 older girls, they're saying, Pa says, what should we do with this $3? Well, they look at Pa, and he's got his boots. And his boots have been mended again and again and again and again, and they're absolutely falling apart. So the girls say, Pa, we think you should get new boots. So they send the man into town to go get some new boots, okay? And they also can calculate by the sun, etc., when he's going to come home. So they're calculating, waiting for him to come back. Okay, Pa walks in the house. Guess what? He's got the same boots on. And they say, Pa, what happened? Where are your new boots? And he said, well, you're not going to believe this. I got into town, and guess who I met? Pastor Alden. And I started talking to Pastor Alden, and I came to find out that he's trying to put up a new bell for the church. And he had received almost all the money that he needed. He was only short $3. That's where the $3 went. But isn't that beautiful? Right? Think about this Pa. He's giving them an example. He's putting, in a sense, this worship, this gratitude toward God before his own genuine needs. Okay. Oh, this is another one of my favorite scenes. So one day, it's really cold out there, blustering wind, kind of like it is now, but maybe 30 degrees colder. Wait a minute, but that's Fahrenheit. Sorry, I don't know how to do that in Celsius. Okay, so it's really, really blustery, and Pa has to go out. And so Ma, Caroline, right, she's tucking Pa in. And you have to remember that Laura is watching all this happening, right? So, she's you know how when somebody's putting a coat on you, it kind of helps, right? And then they fix your scarf, and you've got your earmuffs, and she's tucking a little bit of love in there to keep it warm, keep him even warmer, right? So she's putting his coat on him, And she says, "Oh, Charles, I wish you had a new coat." Charles grabs Caroline and he kisses her. And he says, "Oh, Caroline, I wish you had diamonds." And can you imagine, right? This is Laura. She's watching this, she's observing, she's soaking in this love between her mother and father. Okay, but by far, my favorite scene is from on the banks of Plum Creek. Okay, I don't know if you can imagine this. Imagine if this were a hill. Okay, this is a hill. And they live for the first time in what's called a dug-out house. So it's literally dug out of the hill. So it's like they dig a cave out of the hill, and there's also a loft inside. So actually, that could be like a loft over there. Okay? So there's like the bottom floor, so it's their kitchen. It's also their bedroom. So Ma and Pa and Carrie's sleep over here. Here's the kitchen. There's one door, and Mary and Laura sleep up in that loft. And there's like a little ladder, right? So they're getting their house settled. And then after they get the whole house settled, this takes probably a whole week, Pa decides, look, let's celebrate and let's go to the creek. So they go to the creek, right? So the girls go to the creek, Ma and Pa go to the creek, they have a picnic out of the creek, and it's so much fun at the creek, right? And so they're leaving Creek now, they've had their day at the creek, and Pa is walking back with Ma and the girls, and he says, "Girls, listen, you may never, never, never go to the creek by yourself. It's dangerous. You may not go to the creek by yourself. We'll try to go again as a family, but do not go to this creek by yourself." Okay. So, so this is, I don't know, weeks later. Ma and Mary are still doing their chores. Laura finished hers early so that she could go play. She's playing outside. And she decides, because she's gotten bored of just playing around the house. So she thinks of the creek. She decides, "Oh, I'm going to go to the creek. I know I'm not supposed to go to the creek, but I'm just going to go to the creek." So she's on the creek, and on the creek, on the creek, and she's on the creek. What is this? It's like this lump of an animal. She gets a stick, she pokes it. The hiss is out. Trench goes back home. What happens? They're sitting at dinner, right? They have dinner together as a family. And she starts talking about it. She says, "I was walking outside and there was this animal. He was like gray and he was a little bit of a lump. And I don't know what he was. I poked him." And so from the description, Pa said, "Well, half pint sounds like a gopher. What do you think, Mom?" "Yeah, it sounds like a gopher." Right? So she her curiosity satisfied. And then they finish dinner, they wash up the dishes. And then Pa takes them upstairs and tucks them in and they say their prayers. And then Pa comes back down, right? Sitting in the kitchen with Mom. And the sun's going down, of course. And there's Laura up in her bed. So Mary's already fallen asleep. Laura's up in her bed. And she's thinking, "Oh, I was going to go to the creek today. I should probably tell Pa and go down there and get my punishment." So she climbs back down the ladder. And Ma and Pa are sitting at the table. And she can't see her father's face anymore because the sun is setting. The sun's already set. And so Laura tells Pa, she says, "Pa, you got to give me a punishment because I was going to go to the creek today. That's how I ran into the gopher." He says, "All right." Okay, so he's sitting there thinking of her punishment. You know what the next line is? This is Laura remembering. You know what the next line is? "And Laura leaned on Pa's knee, and she could feel how good and how kind he was." Isn't that gorgeous? She's waiting for her punishment, and she can feel how good and how kind he is. Right? You realize that Charles is an image to her of God the Father. Right? He's doing what every Christian father should do, is to teach their daughters about God the Father. And many, 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 many years later, when Laura Ingalls Wilder is probably, in her 80s, and her father has died a long time ago, someone was writing her biography, and they were interviewing her, and they said, "Why did you write the Little House books? Why did you write them?" And she said, because I wanted the memory of my pa to live on. Right? Something remarkably dishonorable, beautiful. So this is great literature, right? This is the shaping of the moral imagination, right? Imagine that. A young girl having her moral imagination shaped by seeing concretely Laura's own conscience at work. There's so many other scenes I could share with you, but I don't want to go beyond the 3 hours. Okay, so this is what I want to do. I just gave you a basic introduction to the project of literature. So now what I'd like to do is take you through only a sliver of first, classical literature, right? So roughly Homer to the 5th century AD. Homer's 8th century BC to 5th century AD. And then next, the medieval period, roughly 500 to 1500. And then this will take us into the sliver of modern literature that we're going to look at, which is Tolstoy's Anna Karenina in the modern period. Okay? So let's start with this sliver of classical literature. And I cannot tell you how indebted I am to the work of Louise Cowan, from which I take. She's been my mentor in understanding literature in this way. So what is the particular sliver that I'd like to look at in classical literature? It is the notion of the feminine. So Dr. Cowan tells us there is something in the poetic universe symbolized by the feminine. Some other law, some grace, something symbolized by woman that points to a law beyond strict rationality. Think of Helen of Troy. Think of Dido. Think of Eve. They symbolize it, right? Helen of Troy, remember she had this dignity, this beauty, causing a fearful 10-year war and the fall of a city. Dido and Aeneas, Adam and Eve, right? Helen, Dido, Eve, they're almost sacred figures, laws unto themselves. And in classical literature, women are tied up with knowledge. Have you noticed that? Eve and the tree, Pandora and the box, Athena, the goddess of wisdom and the teacher of heroes. And so these are particularly feminine tasks. The education of the youth, right? Bestowing wisdom, enculturating the young into a community, inspiring hearts into the truth, right? You've heard the saying, I hope, the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. And so women are entrusted with wisdom. The beautiful communicates the true. So the feminine heralds a mysterious grandeur that is our destiny. Right? And I think this is part of why the feminine must be protected by man. Now, in the realm of love, men and women are connected to different forms of love. So, woman is connected to agapic love, right? So the form of love that is divine love. So she's connected to the giving of love, right? She receives the man. Agapic love, divine love. This is what woman is connected to, the giving of love. Whereas man is connected to erotic love. Erotic love in the sense of the going out, right? The questing for love, right? So he goes on a quest to find the princess, right? And then what happens? She receives him. So women are connected to the giving of love, agapic love. And men are connected to this questing for love, looking for love, if you read classical literature. And so within that paradigm of what men and women are connected to, how does a classical author show you when a woman is in trouble? Or when a woman's spirit has been perverted? How does he portray that? By an inversion of the order. In other words, when you find a feminine character, when you find a female character in the masculine modality, there's something gone wrong. So for instance, a woman in the questing mode like Medea. Do you remember Medea? And how she seduces Jason? She chooses Jason. She wants Jason, so she seduces him. She gets him to fall in love with her, right? She's in the questing mode. And then what ends up happening? Because Jason didn't choose her, he ends up committing adultery on her. And so what does she do to get her revenge? She chops up their 2 sons and feasts them to him for dinner, right? There's something really perverse there, right? This is woman, in a sense, destroyed, perverted. You might also think of Clytemnestra and Aeschylus's Oresteia. So if you remember, she's the wife of Agamemnon, and she has this affair with Aegisthus. And so together with her lover, they kill Agamemnon. And so you have Orestes and Electra, the 2 children of Agamemnon, who try to seek revenge, right? To seek to avenge their father. So again, there's that woman in the questing mode. Another woman in the questing mode you may be familiar with is Phaedra. She falls in love with this younger man, Hippolytus. You're probably most familiar with a figure in Hebrew literature, the Old Testament, Potiphar's wife. Do you remember that? How she's this married woman and she falls in love with Joseph, who's got to be 10 years younger than she is. So this woman, this Phaedra, is like Potiphar's wife in the questing mode. So there's something gone wrong. Okay, now, that was our sliver from the classical period, looking at woman. Now let's look at a sliver from medieval literature. And I want to focus specifically on the propositions made by Denis de Rougemont in his book called Love in the Western World. Denis de Rougemont's work, Love in the Western World, particularly his proposal that the medieval romances went astray in their exaltation and glorification of passion. But I think we need to make an important distinction first between sensuality and passion. So, sensuality is normal, it's good, it's of the body, it's part of genuine love. And in fact, this is what the theology of the body attempts to capture, right? That sensuality is in a sense the goodness, but in its raw form. It needs to be redeemed to become tenderness. So sensuality is normal, it's of the body, it's part of genuine love. It needs purification. It needs selflessness. And so the Christian ideal of married sexual love is love being characterized by both reverence and modesty, right? That's a beautiful romantic sexual love. One that's characterized by reverence and modesty. Okay, different from, it's opposed to passion. So passion is not lust per se, but its gratification can be considered a part of passion. So passion for Denis de Rougemont is really being in love with being in love. Okay. I have to apologize that I didn't do my homework very well because I didn't study what is the most popular type of music being listened to right now in Dublin. So I'm telling you about American music, okay? I don't know if you listen to much of American music, okay? But those of you who are familiar with American music, popular music, and this represents the amount of American music. Can you tell me what percentage of popular music is about being in love with being in love? I'm sorry?
50%.
50%. Anybody else?
92%.
92%!
20%.
Okay, I'm going to go with the 92%, but even if you ask Americans, they'll actually say, well, 99.8%, okay? Because, and then what percentage of music, therefore, is about being faithful, living in the struggle, accepting that life is difficult, getting over yourself and your self-centeredness and your self-pity. How much of music is about that? Right? Almost none. But isn't that precisely where we need the encouragement? So what's forming our imagination is this being in love with being in love. Right? Think of all the people who stand in their showers singing these songs about being in love with being in love. So what does Denis de Rougemont call it? He calls it the dream of being a god unto oneself. And he equates it with seeking death. Right? If you eat of this tree, you will become as God. But what does God tell us? On the day you eat it, you shall die. So, think about this. One of the chaplains that we had at, I think one of my favorite, by far, chaplains that we've had at the Mother House. We've had many, many, many dear chaplains, but I think because he had a poetic soul, and he was such a brilliant theologian, Father John Rock, he worked side by side with Joseph Ratzinger in the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith. I still remember this homily that he gave. This is what he said. The love of Tristan and Isolde, the love of Lancelot and Guinevere, the love of Romeo and Juliet says to the world, be damned. Think about that. The love of Tristan and Isolde, the love of Lancelot and Guinevere, the love of Romeo and Juliet says to the world, be damned. What does that mean? It says, I don't care about you, right? I care about me. So this is the tricky thing. I don't know if this is happening in Ireland, but it's definitely happening in America. They're taking Romeo and Juliet and they're making you read it when you're like you're in your 7th or 8th grade. You're 13 or 14 years old. And you don't understand what the heck is happening. Does that happen here in Ireland? Okay, all right, good. I am surrounded right now, I know it, by really intelligent people. Okay, please be honest with me. Because we're actually really talking about pathos. We're not talking about logos per se. But logos also is involved. Okay, so go with pathos. Raise your hand if you found Romeo and Juliet annoying. You are just lost. Yes, they are incredibly annoying. And in fact, Shakespeare does that on purpose. He makes them annoying. Why? Well, I'm sure there's a dissertation written on this somewhere. And if there isn't, there should be. Take, for instance, just the number of times he uses the word to. T-O-O, as in excessive, right? Because that's the whole point, right? They have this puppy love that's absolutely ridiculous and totally self-centered and off the charts self-centered, okay? Oh my goodness, I'm so glad they didn't have an Instagram account. Okay, so, like, if you look at, okay, so remember this? I think Act 1 is all about this argument, right? And Romeo is in love with Rosalind and he can't wait to see Rosalind. And then all of a sudden he sees Juliet. And he forgets totally about Rosalind, right? So that's not a real love. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a few examples. The word to, T-O-O, occurs 57 times in Romeo and Juliet. I mean, that's according to Sporkle. I would prefer to go back and count myself, but I didn't have the time. Okay, so here's an example of what Romeo says. Is love a tender thing? It is too rough, too rude, too boisterous, and it pricks like thorns. Juliet says, it is too rash, too unadvised, too sudden, too like lightning. Okay, and then finally, at the end we're just going to skip to the end of the play where they actually both die, thanks be to God. Friar Lawrence, so we're all relieved, right? Friar Lawrence comes upon the scene, and he's going to preach to us over the dead bodies of Romeo and Juliet. And what does he say? Right, he represents God to some extent, right? This judgment. These violent delights have violent ends, and in their triumph die, like fire and powder, which as they kiss, consume. The sweetest honey is loathsome in his own deliciousness, and to the taste confounds the appetite. Therefore, love moderately, for long love doth so. Too swift arrives, as tardy as too slow. Right? It's definitely worth memorizing. But isn't that beautiful? Like, this is not the kind of love, right? Why is this play out there? To help young people recognize that this puppy love that's completely self-centered, that's not real love. That love's not going to last. You're seeking death. Now, I would like also to share with you an example from American culture. So this is the 1960s, and I think it makes me proud. I mean, I'm obviously Chinese. I don't know if you could tell I'm Chinese, but I consider myself an American since I was born there and raised there. But in the 1960s, there was a musical written by Lerner and Loewe based on ultimately, Le Morte d'Arthur by Sir Thomas Malory, and Once and Future King by T.H. White, right? So the Arthurian legends. And really what happens in the Arthurian legends, again and again, what you see, it's part of the storyline, is that King Arthur's wife, Queen Guinevere, commits adultery with Lancelot, right? So that's the theme that's revisited again and again. So for instance, in Tennyson, Idylls of the King, Arthur Lord Tennyson, the city is built on music, right? That's proportion, that's harmony. Music is a symbol of the moral life. And what happens? In Tennyson's version, Arthur refuses to confront the adultery of Lancelot and Guinevere. And so what happens to the city? It falls apart. And look, historically, you've seen this again and again, right? What leads to the fall of Rome, what leads to the fall of Greece, what leads to the fall of the greatest civilizations is moral corruption, right? It's the same lesson. Okay, so when Lerner and Lowe rewrite this in the 1960s, they have Guinevere sing this famous song, and you could look it up. It's Julie Andrews singing this song. It's kind of like one of the masterpieces still used in the repertoires of young people who are learning to sing today. It's called I Loved You Once in Silence. I don't know if you're familiar with this. It goes something like this. I loved you once in silence, and misery was all I knew. So I'm not going to sing the rest because I don't want to torture you, okay? So this is Guinevere talking about her love for Lancelot. Trying so to keep my love from showing, all the while not knowing you loved me too. Yes, loved me in lonesome silence, your heart filled with dark despair, knowing love would flame in you forever, and I'd never know the flame was there. Then one day we cast away our secret longing. The raging tide we held inside would hold no more. The silence at last was broken. We flung wide our prison door. Every joyous word of love was spoken. Okay, so in other words, they confess their love to each other. They commit adultery. And you know what the refrain of this song is that's in this musical, so widely spread all across America? This is the refrain. And now there's twice as much grief, twice the strain for us, twice the despair, twice the pain for us as we had known before. Right? And in this play, what happens? Guinevere goes off to a convent, and then I forgot, Lancelot goes off to punishment, and they both go do penance for their sins, basically. Right? So this is what we have to ask. We have to ask what literature is doing and how it's forming us, right? Because not all literature is like this. So look at this. I love the way actually Joseph Pierce, he's kind of helped me to come up with this chart. Right? He talks about good literature. Watch this, okay? So there's good literature and there's bad literature. So we can talk about, this is morals. And this is execution. Execution, okay? So you can have good morals, or you can have bad morals. So for instance, in Romeo and Juliet, we find good morals, and we find good execution, right? But there's work today where you can have bad morals, but good execution. Have you noticed that? Okay, I don't know if you have any suggestions for me. What has been suggested to me, for instance, is The Notebook. Are anybody familiar with that? So it's all about this young couple. It starts off with I think they're in a nursing home, and he's sitting by her bedside. But basically, because they fell in love and they had such a passionate love, that fornication was okay. But it's so well executed, right? The story is so wonderful and romantic, all that stuff, that it has bad morals, but the execution is good. And so notice how this makes it more treacherous, right? When you have this really attractive, well done execution. Okay. If you have more examples of that, I'd love to take them. Some people have suggested Shrek is another one. Bad morals, good execution, right? It's like destroying the whole infrastructure that was already created in fairy tales, right? It tries to talk about. Now, we're not worried about this. Bad execution art. Too bad, good morals, right? It does a disservice to good morals. Bad execution art with bad morals. We're not worried about bad execution art because that's not going to last. It's the good execution art. Right? This is the most dangerous. Good execution with bad morals. right? Because that's what spreads, that's what captures the mind and the heart, right? But to evil purpose rather than to good purpose. So, this is what Denis de Rougemont is pointing out in the medieval romances, that the chivalric romances go astray. Because he says what happens in these chivalric romances, it used to be that the adulterer was someone who was pitied, was despised. But all of a sudden, he became someone interesting. So notice this, there's a shift. There's a shift. We still have good execution, but the medieval literature has shifted into this bad morals, right? And we're living in the aftermath of that today, something that began with medieval literature. So I want you to think about this idea of the love of Lancelot and the love of Tristan and Isolde, the love of Lancelot and Guinevere, the love of Romeo and Juliet says to the world, be damned, right? I don't care about you. I only care about me. What's happening there? The other person becomes a mere means for my self-worship. Right? Juliet is a mere means for Romeo's self-worship. Romeo is a mere means of Juliet's self-worship. What happens if you actually live this in reality? You have, first of all, a rejection of reality. And what's the most foundational reality? The most foundational reality is that we're made in the image and likeness of God, and therefore he planned for the human family to be a communion of persons. Right? We're all born into a family. We're all born into a communion of persons. And so, what happens when you seek death? When you only search for yourself? What do? You reject that communion of persons. You reject that reality. And then also you refuse responsibility. You refuse responsibility. It's so interesting. John Paul II says, the measure of love is this: the amount of responsibility one takes for the beloved. Isn't that beautiful? The measure of love is this: the amount of responsibility one takes for the beloved. So, if you're seeking death, you refuse responsibility. Now, I have to confess, I hope they'll edit this out of the recording, but I come from, unfortunately, my own parents divorced. And of course, we're wounded like other members of society. The sisters are, the fathers are, the brothers are, right? So we're kind of a cross-section of the regular society. So I come from a divorced family, and my one of the other sisters who comes from a divorced family recommended to me to read this book called Primal Loss. And it's a series of testimonies written by adult children of divorced parents, right? And you see, they share how the divorce of their parents early on affected their own marriages and their own idea of commitment and their own sense of their capacity to keep commitment, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's an adult man, and he's telling the story about his own childhood. And he says it's like this. He said, it was like this. It was like we were on a private jet. Mom and Dad were the pilot and co-pilot. And we were sitting on a plane, right? We're on this private jet, and we're all doing our thing, right? We're playing card games, we're doing things, we're talking to each other, we're having fun, we're enjoying this. And then it's like in the middle of the flight, mid-flight, Dad gets up out of the pilot seat, he takes one of the parachutes, and then he opens up the side door, messing up the cabin pressure for everyone else, and says, puts the parachute on, says, good luck, y'all, bye, and then jumps out, right? So that's how this adult man experienced what his father did to him in childhood. Now, an even more stark image was given at the World Meeting of Families in Philadelphia by a priest who was speaking about perhaps his own experience. He said, what happens when parents divorce? He said it's like they take the cross and they put it on the kitchen table. And now the children have to come and pick it up. Right, so there's a pain caused by this refusal of responsibility, right? And we in this room have borne the brunt of other people, right? Not accepting their responsibility, refusing their responsibility, and we don't want to fall into that same rejection of responsibility. Because that rejection of responsibility ultimately is also a rejection of moral norms. It's a rejection of societal ethics. Okay, so that was the sliver then from medieval literature. Because believe it or not, this is going to help you understand what's happening in Tolstoy's Anna Karenina. So we looked at the sliver from classical literature, the conception of the feminine, and then we looked at the sliver from medieval literature, especially where the romances went astray, and what it means to be seeking death. Because this is the tradition that Tolstoy, in the modern period, this is the tradition within which he's writing. And he's going to draw upon the tradition as he creates his story. Okay, so Anna Karenina was published in 1877 by Leo Tolstoy, who is Russian Orthodox. And the structure of the novel, in looking at the structure of the novel, what do we find? We find an artistic vision that is deeply moral. An artistic vision that is deeply moral. Now, if you want something metaphysical, go to Dostoevsky. If you want something moral, go to Tolstoy. So, what is the logos? What is the ethos of Anna Karenina? It is. Oh, I won't tell you just yet. First, I want to take a quick poll. Okay, let's just do this for Irish society. Or society in Ireland, okay? So, let's do something on a scale of 1 to 10. Okay, so do you think that Irish society is the best, the greatest, the strongest it could be? Then you would raise your hand when I say 10, okay? And I'm going to go 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And if you think Irish society is at the worst it could possibly be, that you can't get any lower, raise your hand at 1. And then raise your hand, of course, anywhere in between. Ready? And then please feel free to look around the room and see what other people are voting, okay? Raise your hand if you give it a 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Wow, you guys. 6, 5, 4. Oh, that's 4 is 3. Oh, more 3s. 2. Oh, 1. 1.
Yeah.
Okay. I always look for the idealist in the room. It's good to have you. Okay, so, okay, next. Are you ready? Let's do the same thing for family. Woo! How strong, how intact are families in Ireland, okay? 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Now, marriage. Marriage, that says marriage. Think about how strong marriages are, how intact, how healthy. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, some 5s, 4, more 4s, 3, 2, lots of 2s, 1. Okay, you all are incredibly consistent. Because think about this. Think about this. What makes for a strong society? With strong families. What makes for a strong family? But a strong marriage. What makes for a strong marriage? A strong person. Right? A chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So you don't want to marry a weak link. And you don't want to be the weak link, right? And in fact, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about the formation of the person, the formation of their moral imagination. That marriage is for life. That marriage is the foundation of society. And in fact, that's the logos. That's the ethos behind Tolstoy's Anna Karenina. That marriage is the foundation of society. So, faithfulness in marriage, he's proposing. Faithfulness in marriage is what upholds society and is absolutely necessary for society. So as you read Tolstoy's Anna Karenina, he's giving you this message that there's something at stake in marriage. There's something at stake in marriage that is larger than ourselves. And that something is sacred. Now, he almost called it a tale of two marriages. Why? Because in the structure of the novel, you have two marriages. You have Anna and Karenina, that's one marriage, and then you have Kitty and Levin, that's the other marriage. Okay, so there are two stories that go alongside each other, parallel to each other, but it's not really parallel, because Tolstoy is not just brilliant, but a genius. These two marriages are actually two different genres of stories. The story of Levin is a comedy. Comedy not in the sense of ha-ha, funny, but the classical sense of comedy. It's a movement upward. And then the story of Anna and Karenina is a tragedy, this movement downward. So let me just situate you with the protagonists of each of these two marriages, these two stories, you could say, the tragedy and the comedy. So one protagonist is Levin. So Levin, Konstantin Levin, he is the protagonist who seeks truth and virtue. That's what he's seeking, truth and virtue. So he's a wealthy man. He comes from the aristocratic class. He prefers the farm, though. And he's upright, he's handsome, but he can be a little bit socially awkward. You know, he's not the most charming, societally, socially adept person. But Levin is seeking always truth and virtue, to know truth and justice. And he's aware of the discrepancies in the real world, between the real world and the ideal. And he seeks to accept, to live by the moral laws of earthly society. And for Levin, marriage is their symbol. Marriage is the symbol of the moral laws of earthly society. And he thinks that thereby, by following the moral laws, he is going to find fulfillment. But what you see in the novel is that Levin's way is actually a via negativa. He seems to have less and less, right? Because the novel starts out with he's falling in love with this Katerina Shcherbatsky, and she rejects him, right? Because she's in love with this military man, Vronsky, right? Who's been courting her, but really just playing with her feelings. So she rejects him, right? The beautiful Katerina, Kitty is her nickname. She rejects him. And so Levin, as the story goes on, he goes back to his farm. He doesn't want to participate in so many things. His movement seems to be a movement downward, but it's not. It's actually a movement upward. Because Levin's story ends with happiness, and a happiness crowned with faith and joy. So that's why Levin is a comedy. Now, who's the other protagonist? The other protagonist is Anna. So Anna is the protagonist who is seeking happiness, right? Innocent enough. She's seeking happiness. But she's seeking self-fulfillment at all costs. And she's concerned only with her reality, her world. And what we actually find, is that Anna is grasping at love. She's seeking love. She's questing for love. And all of a sudden, this should ring a bell, right? Because you realize, if you look at the classical paradigm, she's a woman in the erotic mode. And so we will see that this is what makes Anna tragic. She makes this choice for self that seems to go upward, right? She seems to have more and more. But it's actually a movement downward. So who is Anna? Anna Karenina, okay, so you know her name is coming from her husband because this is the way they do it in Russian society. Anna Karenina is her husband's name, so they add the feminine ending, Karenina. So it's almost like her name means the Anna of Karenina, right? Because now their destinies are bound together. So it's a fitting title, right? Anna Karenina. So she's a noble woman, a happy woman. She's a happy woman. She's beautiful. She's the queen of St. Petersburg society. And she's one who helps others. In fact, the novel opens with her encouraging a woman, Dolly, whose husband has committed adultery on her. She's encouraging Dolly to persevere, to forgive her husband, to show mercy, right? Especially for the sake of her children. So We see Anna upholding moral ideals, Christian ideals. And Anna is also happily married to Karenina. So this is a problem with all the movies that I've ever seen made on Anna Karenina, is they always present Anna as unhappy in her marriage, and Karenina is some cold, unfeeling man who's very harsh. No, that's not at all that's not at all the portrait that Tolstoy paints of Karenina. So just don't even watch the movies, because they're going to destroy your moral imagination, or they're going to destroy what Tolstoy is actually trying to do in the novel. I'll actually read you a passage where you will see evidence that they had a happy marriage. They had an intimate marriage. They understood one another beautifully. Who is this Karenin? Well, Karenin is a good man. He's a bureaucrat. He's a successful businessman. And he has a piety for appearances that is appropriate. It's healthy, right? So he follows societal norms. He follows moral norms. And again, they have a good marriage. And Anna has been happy with him, right? She is happy. She's already happy. Okay. There's no evidence in the novel that they have not had a happy marriage. I want to emphasize that. Okay. So, what happens? Do you remember that military man that Kitty had a huge crush on because he was playing with her feelings? There's this military man, Count Vronsky. And in between his flirtations with Kitty, he was just leading her on, really. He wasn't serious about marrying her. He sees one night at some social event, he sees Anna in a black dress. And he basically falls in love with her, right? He's in love with being in love with her. And so he decides he has to have her. He finds out she's a married woman. He decides he still has to have her, right? So, because Anna is a moral, upright woman, right? She discourages him, right? She turns him away. But he keeps pursuing her. And this is another theme in all great literature. You find it in Cervantes, you find it in Shakespeare. That women are made of glass. That's actually the way Cervantes puts it. Women are made of glass. And the great source of their downfall is their vanity. And so Vronsky's persistent, strong, passionate appeals to Anna slowly break her down. And Anna feels herself being broken down, right? Because he's this handsome, wealthy military man with a uniform, right? And so Anna decides she's going to take a train and she's going to leave town so she can get away from Vronsky. But what happens? When she gets on the train, who's there? Count Vronsky. So I'd like to read this to you. Anna's speaking to Count Vronsky. She sees him on the train. I didn't know you were going. And why are you going? She said, letting fall the hand which grasped the doorpost. And irrepressible joy and animation shone in her face. Why am I going? He repeated, looking straight into her eyes. You know that I am going to be where you are, he said. I cannot do otherwise. And at this very point, as though it had overcome all obstacles, the wind scattered the snow from the car roofs and began to flutter some sheet of iron it had torn off, while the low-pitched whistle of the engine set up a roar in front, dismal and lamenting. All the awesomeness of the blizzard now seemed still more splendid to her. He had uttered precisely what her soul yearned for, but which her reason dreaded. She made no answer, and in her face he beheld a struggle. Forgive me if what I have said displeases you, he said humbly. He had spoken courteously, deferentially, yet so firmly, so obdurately, that for long she could find no answer. What you say is wrong, and I beg you, if you are a good man, to forget what you have said, even as I shall forget it, she said at last. Not a single word of yours, nor a single gesture, shall I ever forget, nor could I forget. Dun dun. Right? He's not a good man. If you are a good man, forget what you have said, even as I shall forget it. Right? So she pleads with him. But he refuses her pleading, and she begins to give in, right? She falls into this temptation. She falls into the temptation, what? You shall be as God, right? You shall be this dream of being a goddess, right? She glimpses in Vronsky's passion this dream, right, that she could be a goddess. And so she begins seeking death. Now, I want you to return again to the classical paradigm. Because what are we seeing? We're seeing that Tolstoy is employing another element of classical tradition, which is this notion of hubris, right? The pride that is the cause of the downfall of the protagonist. So, but this is what's also interesting. Because hubris in man and hubris in woman in the classical tradition actually take on two different forms, right? Because it's not women that you see who want some dream of power, right? That's men, right? So it's Alexander the Great, right? It's Julius Caesar. They have some dream of power. Or you think of Icarus, right? Flying to touch the sun. So this dream of power, that's usually what it is for men. But what form does hubris take for a woman? What form does hubris take for women? Okay, if you're a woman, and you're an honest woman, try this on. For a woman, hubris takes the form of the desire to be the center of adoring worship. The desire to be the center of adoring worship. I think Dr. Karen is right on when she suggests that, right? That's, again, vanity, right? How you can get any woman to fall. And so this is Anna's form of pride, right? The belief that she can be a goddess, that she can be loved infinitely, she can be the center of adoring worship. And so she embraces this imaginary dream and forsakes the real. Now, what happens? Anna, okay, this is the way things work in St. Petersburg society. If you are a married woman and you have a husband, what you would do is you would go from table, you'd visit the people at this table, you'd visit the people at this table, you'd stand with the people by the mantle, and then maybe you would go over to this table over here, and then you'd go over to the chairs over here. But you would make your rounds of the room, and your husband is probably doing the same thing. And some married couples would even travel together in these different little circles at a particular party. Okay, so this is what Anna and Karenina have been doing for the 8 years they've been married. And usually what happens after these parties is they debrief, right? They talk about what happened at the party, when back at home, and Anna's, taking off her jewelry and undressing, etc. They're talking about what happened at the party, the new things that they learned. Okay. So there's one particular party that happens after Count Vronsky is relentlessly pursuing Anna, and Anna is finally getting in. What happens? At a party, publicly, Anna and Vronsky are at a table. And you know how you can kind of tell when people are by themselves and they don't want anybody really coming to their table? So you get this awkward sense when you try to come to their table. So people do try to filter in and out, right, of this table of Anna and Vronsky, but the two of them never leave this table, right? But then what happens? And Karenina arrives. They for some reason came to the party separately. And so Karenina arrives, right? And as he's traveling around the different circles, what does he hear whisperings of? People are talking about why are Anna and Count Vronsky, why this is inappropriate, right? That's what's being whispered about. So Karenina is upset. He goes home early, right? Because this is a source of scandal. And so he decides that he's going to talk to Anna. And this is the famous temptation scene in Anna Karenina. Anna walks in. Karenina's already been home. Anna came in with her head bent, playing with the tassels of her hood. Her face was glowing with a vivid glow, but this glow was not one of joyousness. It recalled the fearful glow of a conflagration in the midst of a dark night. On seeing her husband, Anna raised her head and smiled, as though she had just waked up. "Oh, you're not in bed? What a miracle," she said, throwing off her hood, and without stopping, she went to the dressing room. "It's late, Alexei Alexandrovich," she said from behind the door. "Anna, I must have a talk with you." "With me?" she said wonderingly. She came out from the door and looked at him. "What is it? What about?" she asked, sitting down. "Well, let's talk if it's so necessary, but it would be better to go to sleep." Anna was saying whatever came to her tongue, and marveled, hearing herself, at her own capacity for lying. How simple and natural were her words, and how likely that she was simply sleepy. She felt herself clad in an impenetrable armor of falsehood. She felt that some unseen force had come to her aid and was supporting her. Any ideas what that unseen force coming to her aid, supporting her might be? "Anna, I must warn you," he began. "Warn me," she said. "Of what?" She looked at him simply and brightly. And that she looked at him so simply, so brightly, that anyone who did not know her as her husband knew her could not have noticed anything unnatural, either in the sound or the sense of her words. But to him, knowing her, knowing that whenever he went to bed 5 minutes later than usual, she noticed it and asked him the reason. To him, knowing every joy, every pleasure, every pain she ever felt, she communicated to him at once. To him, it meant a great deal to see that she did not care to notice his state of mind, that she did not care to say a word about herself. He saw that the inmost recesses of her soul that had hitherto lain open before him were now closed against him. You see this? See how in this passage you see the intimacy, the mutual understanding, even exchanged by glances that they share, right? But now she's closed to him. He saw that the innermost recesses of her soul that had always hitherto lain open before him were now closed against him. More than that, he saw from her tone that she was not even perturbed at that, but seemed to be saying straightforwardly to him, "Yes, it is closed now, which is as it should be, and will be so in the future." Now he experienced a feeling such as a man might have who, returning home, finds his own house locked up. Okay, right, this is what has to happen. How do you break off? How do you say to the world, "Be damned"? You put up a wall. You put up a wall, that's a rejection of your responsibilities, and that's what's happening. So shortly after this, bam, Anna and Vronsky commit adultery, right? They officially begin having an affair. So now I take you, remember there are spoilers in the next section and the remainder of this talk. So the famous scene, one of the most famous scenes from Anna Karenina is the horse racing scene. So Count Vronsky is actually a favored champion in horse races, and he has this majestic, beautiful white horse whose name is Frou Frou. So Count Vronsky is one of the favored winners of his favored to win, but he also has one of his most hated competitors at the same horse race. And then meanwhile, people are in the stands, right? So instead of watching football, in America we watch football. You watch soccer, you watch rugby. Okay, sorry, I don't know. Okay, so they're sitting in the stands, they're watching chess. You said they got binoculars, right? They're all watching. And Anna has come to the horse races with her husband, Karenina, right? So Karenina has no idea what's going on, right? He only knows about what happened at the party. So, and he thinks Anna's a good woman. Okay, so they're in the back, right? And they're watching. Okay, so you see them at the starting, right? And Count Vronsky and his most hated rival, they exchange glances and words that are a little bit hateful, okay? And then the gun, and they're off, right? So what happens? Vronsky's riding, and the first fence that he has to clear, right, is pretty tall, and Frou Frou, majestic Frou Frou, clears it beautifully, But then what happens? The horse is about now to land after it's risen very high in the air. And Tolstoy has Count Vronsky make a fatal riding error. Why? To show his lack of moral integrity. And what is the fatal riding error that Vronsky makes? Is he lands on the horse's back while simultaneously pulling back on the reins. In other words, what does he do? He breaks the horse's neck. And so when Frou-Frou lands and Vronsky pulls back on the reins, the horse falls, right? Because its neck has been broken. And Vronsky is stuck, like his leg is stuck underneath, right? And Anna, meanwhile, is watching this and is distressed, right? And so Vronsky pulls himself out from underneath Frou-Frou, and he starts begging Frou-Frou, Frou-Frou, get up! Frou-Frou, get up! And then his hated rival passes him and shouts something, and then Vronsky's even more full of anger. He begs Frou-Frou, Frou-Frou, get up! Frou-Frou, get up! But Frou-Frou obviously cannot get up. What does Vronsky do at this point? He starts kicking Frou-Frou. This image paints itself indelibly upon your mind, and it remains in your imagination. Vronsky kicking the spirited, majestic, beautiful horse that he has destroyed. And it makes you ask the question, who is Frou-Frou? Who is the beautiful, majestic creature that Vronsky has destroyed? Right? And notice it's a base image. He uses a base image. Why? Because he's trying to capture the baseness of adultery. Okay. Meanwhile, what's happening up in the stands? Anna is basically becoming hysterical. And Karenina is upset by this, right? Because it's inappropriate, that her reaction is disproportionate. It's inappropriate. So he takes Anna and he's going to put her in a carriage and send her home, right? So he puts her in a carriage. And as he's putting her in the carriage to leave her home, and he's shutting the door, Anna looks at her husband, Karenina, and she says, I love Count Vronsky. I am his mistress. That's the big revelation, okay? And so what has to happen after that? Well, Karenina is going to do what's societally appropriate, right? So he is going to formally separate from Anna, and he's going to keep their son, 8-year-old son, Sheryosha, and Anna is going to be separated from her son. She says, she swears she loves him, she buys him presents, right? But what is she really saying to him? What does she really say to her son by her actions? Be damned. She says to her son, be damned. She says to her husband, be damned, right? So what happens? Count Vronsky and Anna, they set up their love nest, right? And it's very interesting because what do you see? You think, okay, yeah, Vronsky, yeah, he seems like he loves Anna. But what happens? He has no work, right? And a man has to have a work. So Tolstoy is, in a sense, showing us the real impotence, right? There's a stagnation in the life of Vronsky because of this sin. And it's really interesting, too, to see how Tolstoy has Vronsky end the novel. Do you know how he has Vronsky end the novel? With a toothache bringing access to. Right? It shows you, right, this, again, a sense of impotence, weakness, right, that this great, supposedly strong man is defeated by a toothache. Okay, meanwhile, let's look at this image that he paints of Levin. Do you remember Levin, who is in love with Kitty? Right, so Levin is, remember, he's strong, he's a farm boy, he's an aristocrat, he's socially awkward, okay? So he's trying to get Kitty's attention, okay? And now I'm changing this a little bit to help you understand, to capture more of the other parts of the book that I can't capture. So I'm condensing them into this scene, so you might not read this exactly there, okay? So you'll get the basic sense. Okay? So basically what's happening? There's a skating rink, okay? There's beautiful, the lake is frozen over, and They're out there skating, right? So I think Kitty is with her mom, as is appropriate, and Levin is there, okay? So they've been talking a little bit, and now Kitty is on the side, and she's resting, right? And her cheeks are this beautiful red, and she's in the sun, right? And Levin is looking at her, and he's just so in love with her, right? He wants to win her over. And so he's talking to his friend, he said, all these young guys are doing this fancy trick, okay? Now, remember, Levin used to actually be the skating champion in his own village, okay? So he's not like a new skater, he's not a new skater, it's been a while. But basically what these young guys are doing is like they're jumping, they're hopping down the step with one foot, and then they're doing this twisty, turny, rolly thing, okay? And so Levin he's Kitty there, right? And he thinks, oh, this is my chance. Like she's got the perfect view of this, right? And so his friend's like, go, without practicing, but he's already gone. Okay, so there he goes. He does hop, hop, hop. Oh, he falls just a little bit. He picks himself up. He does a twisty, turny thing, and he sprints around. Right? He does all those little flips, and he swirls around. And what does he see? He sees Kitty laughing and smiling. Right? Her eyes are shining in the sunshine, and Levin is filled with joy to see Kitty smiling and laughing. Why? Well, any young man that's taken out a beautiful young girl on a date, what do? You want to contribute to her, right? So she's cold, you take your coat off, you put it around her. And then you actually tell a really funny joke. And she actually gives a genuine laugh, not one of those She gives you a genuine laugh. Like, why does it fill your heart with joy? If you can answer that, you'll understand what Levin experienced. It's because he has the sense, I can provide for her. I can make her happy. Right? And so these are the beautiful images that you see Tolstoy painting of Levin, right? A man with moral integrity. Right? So notice it's again this act of physical expertise, in a sense, that he uses to demonstrate Levin's moral integrity. But when I was reading Anna Karenina for the second time, I also noticed how Levin has got his hands in the soil. He has his face up to receive the rain falling upon him, right? His hand on the barks of trees. It's like Levin is in love with reality as God created it. Good and bad, difficult and easy. Right? So it's really beautiful. So then that Levin basically, it's a good ending for Kitty and Levin, right? They end up getting married. But there's a really beautiful portrait there of what happens, like the struggles of early marriage. So we talked about how Vronsky ended the novel. How does Anna end the novel? Okay, here's a spoiler. She throws herself in front of a train. So basically, she commits suicide. And you know what Vronsky's mother says? Vronsky's mother says, her life was as vulgar as her death. I want to say, wait, can we just look at your son for a second? Okay. And in a sense, what Anna is capturing for us is the tragedy of idolatry. What is the tragedy of idolatry? Idolatry is to attribute holiness to something that cannot bear its weight. Idolatry is to attribute holiness to something that cannot bear its weight. And this is precisely what she did in idolizing the passion of Vronsky. And so Anna, in her turning away from those inviolable, unwritten laws to finding happiness, finds instead absolute nothingness. In her turning away from those inviolable, unwritten laws to finding happiness, Anna finds instead absolute nothingness. And that is what an adulteress can teach us about happiness. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Mary, Queen of Families, and all you holy married couples, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you all for your very patient listening.
Thanks for listening to this lecture on the Thomistic Institute podcast. The generosity of people like you makes this podcast possible. If you enjoy these talks, please consider showing your support at www.thomisticinstitute.org/donate. Your donation of even $1 helps us reach more college students and many others with the powerful truths of the faith, and it ensures that we can keep publishing top-notch lectures on this podcast. Thanks a lot.